I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to introduce you to CIRM if you haven't heard of us before, the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. What I'd like to do today is give you a little window into where we've been, where we are today, and where we think we're going in the future. So as an overview, as I just said, I'd like to point out what our mission is, what our origins are, what we did in the early years, highlight in broad strokes, some of the progress we feel like we've made to date, and then give you a preview for where we think we're going in the future. So our mission statement is as follows: accelerating world-class science to deliver transformative regenerative medicine treatments in an equitable manner to a diverse California and world. So CIRM was created back in 2004 with Proposition 71. The voters of California chose to provide $3 billion in bond funding to support the development of cellular therapies, stem cell therapies at that time. In 2020, when that money was basically exhausted, a new proposition was approved by the voters of California, Proposition 14, that provided an additional $5.5 billion in funding. So thank you to the voters of California. CIRM supports therapy development across the spectrum, from the bench to the bedside, as is shown here. I think we've seen something like this slide before in some previous talks. You start with a foundational and idea, the basic discovery research. CIRM will fund that. That hopefully turns into a single candidate that you're interested in trying to understand whether this could help in a given disease indication. And then there's all the translational work and the clinical work, interacting with the FDA in an investigational new drug application. Hopefully that results in IND, investigational new drug application approval by the FDA, and then several phases of clinical trial filing, clinical trial activities, and ultimately the filing of a biological license application. And as I said, CIRM will fund anything from the foundational research all the way through to the BLA filing. In addition, CIRM, as part of its mission, funds infrastructure as well as education and workforce development, and I'll get into a little more of that in a few minutes. So in the early years, stem cells were very new back in the early 2000s. So a lot of what we funded was understanding the biology of the pluripotent and adult stem cells, using stem cells as tools for biomedical research, using stem cells as therapies or sources of therapies, and finally looking at stem cells endogenous in humans that might be the targets of therapeutic activity. Wrong button. Thank you. So in the early years, layering the scientific foundation of technical workforce and research and development infrastructure. So we invested a fair amount of money into shared laboratories, major facilities, and cell line resources. At that time, the federal government was not funding any work into human embryonic stem cell research. Also, money was applied to basic applied research, tools, technology, and new faculty support to bring the brain trust into California to perform this research. And finally, research and training, internship programs, and conference support. And what we're seeing here is a part of that conference support. We're helping to support this conference that we're all attending now. As I said, in 2020, Proposition 14 passed with an additional $5.5 billion, and a new strategic plan was implemented, which involved three main objectives: advancing world-class science, which includes now developing additional shared research labs and building knowledge networks. What we'd really like to do is deliver real-world solutions, so advancing therapies to marketing approval, so that's the biological licensing application, creating manufacturing partnership networks, expanding the series of clinics for clinical trials that we call the Alpha Clinics Network, and creating new ways to funnel patients into clinical trials. One of those is called the Community Care Centers of Excellence. And finally, we'd like to provide opportunity for all by building a diverse and highly skilled workforce. A lot of the research and development that goes on takes knowledge that your average college graduate even does not have. So we're trying to develop programs and support programs that develop that very specialized knowledge. With the Proposition 14, also there was the addition of genetic therapy approaches. There was a call out for specifically $1.5 billion to go to neuro research, and also some new infrastructure initiatives. So just to point out a couple of areas of impact, I keep doing that. The pointer now works, but I can't work it, so. So by the numbers, we've invested over $4.1 billion have already been invested. We funded over 1,400 projects and over 109 clinical trials, with over 3,400 patients in those clinical trials. And importantly, that $4 billion invested has brought in an additional $24 billion in industry funding. We are disease agnostic. We've looked at in excess of 85 different diseases that we've funded. We have, as I mentioned, the Alpha Clinics Network. There are 9 clinical sites in California that are funded by CIRM. Training, over 4,000 internees and trainee fellows. We've led to the creation of over 50 new businesses, and this number keeps changing, but over 50,000 full-time equivalent jobs in California have been created with this funding. Just to get a little deeper into the training, we actually will fund training at almost all levels. So shown here are 2 of the programs. Bridges program, which is the transition from late undergraduate, master's, sort of not going to go on to a PhD, getting a degree, helping them to move into a field of cell and genetic therapy research. We also have the Scholars Program. So these are people getting MDs or PhDs or working as clinical fellows. Damn it. I wish they'd delete this button. In addition to the Bridges and Scholars, on the next slide, we also have a Spark program and a Compass program. So these are the earliest forms of development and the earliest forms of training. The Spark program is designed for high school students to give them a flavor from summer internships working in a lab. And the Compass program is for undergraduates that may be interested, aren't really sure, but give them an opportunity to experience cell and gene therapy type research firsthand. So just to give you an overview of some of the progress we've made to date, and this is just our clinical trial portfolio. And as I said, disease agnostic with over 109 clinical trials funded. Just pointing out that many areas of active research that we fund, and neurological injuries and diseases, disorders, where SLC 6A1 would fall. And just to point out that historically that 1.5 billion going forward out of the 5.5 would be around what we have been spending already. So it's not really as if this new money has more money for neuro research. It just sort of cements the fact that we will continue to have a keen interest in funding neurological disorders and injury and neurodevelopmental and neurodegenerative. And the same is true in research and development, where we have presence of diseases across the spectrum, and again, a relatively large component in the neurological disease and injury space. Another area of focus is shared resources. So what I've been suggesting previously is that we'll fund specific research projects aimed at a single disease, but we also like to try and fund things that could be useful for lots of different researchers working in different areas. And so shared resources labs for stem cell-based modeling is one of these. This is a relatively new effort, just beginning next month. And these are to broaden the access to stem cell-based models across California, increase educational opportunities in stem cell-based techniques, and advance the standards and reproducibility of stem cell models. As I mentioned, the Alpha Clinic network that we have been supporting, there are 9 sites around California shown here. There are both CIRM-funded trials at these sites as well as industry-funded trials, and over 1,700 patients have been treated in these clinical sites, and it's drawn in over $100 million in industry contracts. Along with the ability to perform the clinical trials, cell and gene therapies are in fact very difficult and challenging to actually manufacture. This is really new technology, so we are also supporting a network of manufacturing sites. And you may notice that the same 9 sites that have clinical alpha clinics also now have manufacturing networks. And the idea is to accelerate and de-risk the path to commercialization, since, as I said, these are very complex therapeutics to make. Also, since it's at the cutting edge, the standards and quality are really still unknown, so try and advance the ability for these sites to make these therapeutics to standards that the FDA will find acceptable. And finally, build leadership and a workforce here in California to be able to manufacture these types of products, therapeutic products. Importantly, we firmly believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So all of our clinical trials, we really work with them to reinforce the notion that getting a diverse population into your trials is really important, because medicines should be available for everybody ultimately. And so if you don't study them in everybody initially, it's hard to know how it will impact the full complement of people that will need the treatment down the road. Just to talk before, the idea that you need to have a wide variety of age ranges, if possible, is a part of this also. And in fact, every grant that we look at, the reviewers do take into consideration what are the diversity, equity, and inclusion principles involved in the research. Looking forward, we have undergone what we call the strategic allocation framework. And what we're doing is trying to identify areas and processes by which we can maximize the use of the remaining funds going forward. And I don't want to read all of this, but the hope is that we can catalyze and accelerate and ultimately advance projects all the way to the biological license application, which would then make them potentially commercially available. And then ensure, one of the focuses is to ensure that any programs that get to this point are actually ready to prepare and submit that biological licensing application. And finally, to make sure that the California workforce is designed to be able to meet the needs of these challenging new cutting-edge cell and gene therapies. Talked about a lot of things, and I just want to point out that we are developing new and improved websites, and this is one here, which we call our collaboration hub. Some of them are coming soon still, but this is a nice resource if you're interested in seeing what's happening at CIRM, what has happened, where we think we're going. We direct you to this website. And finally, I mentioned that the alpha clinics, I showed we have 9 of them. We're introducing 2 new concepts. So the alpha clinics. The alpha clinics have been around for a little while now, and they address a barrier, which is clinical expertise and the ability to bring in cohorts. But we've noticed that there's also geographical issues. People can't get to sites if they don't live in those 9 centers, near those 9 major metropolitan centers. patients aren't always aware, so patient knowledge, and then there are financial burdens to getting into clinical trials. So we have these two newer programs, the Community Care Centers of Excellence, that'll be launching next year. And these are smaller sites outside of the larger urban areas that will increase their knowledge base in the use of these cutting-edge cell and gene therapies, and be able to hopefully refer more people to the clinical sites that are specialized in delivering these types of therapies. And finally, we're introducing a new patient support program, which is designed to, in addition to increasing the geographical reach of the clinical trials and the patient knowledge, but also to add some financial support, because if you're not in that local metropolitan area that has a alpha clinic, you have to travel there. You have to stay while you're there. And so this is a way to help defray some of the costs of participating in clinical trials. With that, I'd like to say thank you, and I'm more than happy to take any questions.